All right, so you should have downloaded and unzipped or git cloned the calendar project to your desktop, and we're going to go ahead and open it up inside Xcode. So first things first, I just want to show you around the main.storyboard that I've created here. Now you'll notice that the design looks a little bit different from the one that we ended up with at the end of the auto layout module. And that's because I added a few more modifications just to make it look a little bit more realistic and more similar to the version of Calculator that we've got on the Mac. So a couple of changes that I've made are, firstly, I've reduced the space between all of the items inside our stack view. So when you click on any of these stack views, you can see that the spacing is only 1 point between all of these gaps. I've also made the background view black so that these gaps show up as lines outlining each button for us. And I've also split up the bottom part by placing these two items in their own stack view and then stacking that along with the 0 into another vertical stack. So now it distributes equally. And I've also changed the font to a thin font at 50 points and some of these other ones a little bit bigger as well, System 30, for example. So now that we've taken a look at the design part, it's useful to take a look at what these parts are all linked to. So I've already created IB outlets and IB actions. So the only outlet that we've got currently is the one that's linked to the display label, which is this one up here. And this display label is going to be the one that's going to show up our results of our calculations, as well as the numbers that the user types into the keypad. Now, there's two IB actions. One of these IB actions are linked to all of the calculation buttons, and it's called calc button pressed. And the other one is linked up to all of the number or the digit related buttons, and it's called num button pressed. And we're going to be using these two methods in order to implement the functionality of our calculator. But it's important that you realize which buttons are linked to which methods. So just familiarize yourself with that. So once you're ready, we can crack on and start building our calculator. So first things first, we want the user to be able to tap on any of these numbers and have it show up here in the display label. So as I mentioned before, the num button pressed is the IB action that's responsible to a tap on any of these buttons. So this is what should happen when a number is entered into the keypad. And this is also where we're going to add our code. So previously in the Xylophone app, if you remember, we also had multiple buttons linked up to the same IB action. And in that case, what we did was we gave each of these buttons a different tag value. And by looking at what the tag value of the sender was, we figured out which button was tapped on. Now that's a little bit manual, and it involves you having to edit the tags manually one by one, which is a bit of a pain. So as I always say, programmers are lazy. So what can we do that makes it a little bit easier and less manual? So I want to know the identity of the button that was tapped. And I know that that information is stored inside this object called sender. Now, this sender has a whole bunch of different properties, such as what is the background color? Well, in this case, it's blue. Or what is the size of the button, for example. Now, you can also see that these different buttons already have a title, right? They already have some text in them. And if I could just figure out what the text was of the button that triggered the IB action, then that will be really helpful for me to implement my calculator functionality. So if we tap into this sender object and we use the dot to find all of its properties, even if you just start searching randomly for what you think could be the name of the property, Xcode is very helpful in pulling up all of the related properties and methods. So in my case, I kind of want to know what the title of that button is. So I might say sender.title. And you can see that it's giving me a whole bunch of suggestions. Do I want the title label? Do I want the title for UI control state? And you can see which ones are variables, which ones are methods. Or do I want the title color, title rect, Now you can see that there's two contenders in this case. One is the title label, and this, as it describes down here, is a view that displays the value of the current title property for a button. So we could go through it this way, but there's actually an even better one if you scroll through this list. There's this one called current title, and the description for this one is the current title that's displayed on the button. Well, that's perfect, right? That's exactly what we need in order to figure out which button was pressed. Now, there's a lot of documentation that you can look up online, and you'll find all the help in the world on Stack Overflow and Google and blog posts, but there's nothing that is quite as quick and easy as just searching for what you want and just coming up with a name that you think is likely and then scrolling through that list for a good contender, just as we did here. So in my case, I want to set the display label's text to the current title of the button. So that means if the user taps 1, I want this to read 1. Now I can do that by tapping into my IP outlet, display label, and then going into its text property and setting that equal to sender.currentTitle. Now there's just one problem. If you hold down Alt and click on current title, you can see that this is a string question mark. So this is an optional string. And if we read through the discussion, the last sentence says that the value may be nil. Well, what if we had a button that didn't actually have a title? Well, in that case, sender.currentTitle will be nil, and this line of code will crash your app. Now, another neat thing that you can see now that you know all about computed properties is that you can see that this current title property is a get only property. So it's read only. So that means we can't, for example, say sender dot current title equals something something. That doesn't work because, as it suggests, current title is the current title that's in the button, and it doesn't let you to give it a new value by setting it. And this is achieved through making current title a computed property that only has a get defined and no set. So here's a little bit of a practical example of what we've been learning about in the last module. Now, in our case, I don't really want this line to crash. So what I want to do is I'm going to use a iflet, and I'm going to call it a num value. So the number value. And I'm going to set that to equal the sender.currentTitle. And if this sender.currentTitle happens to be not nil, then inside the iflet is where we're going to set the display label.text to equal to that new unwrapped num value. And you can see now num value is just a bog standard regular string as opposed to an optional string. So we can test our app and see what we get. All right, so here's our simulator on the left here, and I'm going to tap on the 7, and you can see 7 shows up in here. Now, there's just a bit of an issue with our app, and I'm sure you can already see it now. What if I wanted 2 digits? Well, I can't at the moment. I can only put in 1 digit because I'm setting the display label.text to equal whatever button was pressed through these 3 lines of code. So here's a challenge. Can you figure out a way of appending the numbers that the user keeps on tapping on so that inside this display label, we display the entire number that they wanted to put in? So for example, if I wanted to type 150, I should be able to see 150 show up here, and to only set it back to nil or allow a new number to be entered when I click on any of these other buttons. So this is pretty much classic calculator functionality. You don't need me to go through it any more than that. So pause the video and see if you can complete that challenge. All right, so basically what we need to do is to append each of these num values to each other and display it in the display label until the user taps on one of these calculate buttons. So a typical case would be, say, for example, I'm trying to type in 150 plus 3, right? So when I type plus, then I can clear the 150 and I can start from scratch on the 3. So in order to do that, I need to have some sort of property that keeps hold of whether if the user is done typing the number. So let's go up here, and just below our IB outlet, let's create a new variable. Let's call it is finished typing number. This is a little bit wordy, but hey, we've got Xcode auto-suggesting everything, so we don't have to type everything out. So why not make it super clear? So is finished typing number is going to be a Boolean, and it's going to start off in life as being true. So when we first start up our app, then is finished typing number is going to be true. So now we can go inside our num button pressed, and we can check to see if is finished typing number is equal to true. You can either use this full syntax where you have it checking with a double equals, or you can simply just delete that, and everything between the if keyword and the open curly brace is evaluated. And if it is true, then this block will be carried out, otherwise it will not. So inside here, if finished typing number is true, then that means we're just starting out and the number in the label is probably 0, or we're just starting out with a new number that we want to type. So in that case, we do want to set the display label.text to equal the num value, so the value of the button that got pressed. So when I first start out the app, the display label says 0, and is finished typing number is going to be initialized to true. So in this case, when I press one of the buttons, then that is the value that is going to go into this UI label. Now, once we've set a number into the label, so the first number is showing up in there, then we have to switch this is finished typing number to false, because we are not done typing the number, right? We've just typed in the first number. And until I press one of these buttons, the orange or the gray buttons, I want my calculator to accumulate all the numbers so that I can type a number that is more than one digit. For example, I want to be able to type 150. So inside here, we can define our else case. So namely, when this IB action is triggered, and we are not finished typing number, we've just started typing a number, then we should be able to accumulate the number by appending them to the previous number. So in this case, then we can say display label.text is equal to the current text in the display label plus, or rather append, what is currently the num value. So what this line of code will do is it will look at the current title of the button that was pressed, and it will append that value to what is currently inside the display label here. So if I run this code now, you can see that when I type 1, now at this point is finished typing number is set to false. So we're going to go inside this else bracket, and that means that the next button I press will get added or appended to the previous value of the display label, and now I have 15. And if I keep going until 0, I can keep adding numbers and it will continue to append. Now, ideally, when I press any of these buttons, for example, plus, I want to be able to start typing a new number instead of continuing to append numbers. So in order for that to happen, we have to go into our calc button pressed, because remember, this IB action is linked to all of the calculation buttons. And here I'm going to set that variable is finished typing number to true, because if I've typed a whole bunch of numbers and then I press the add button, then I'm pretty much finished typing number, right? I want to type a new number to add to my last number. So now let's run our app with that minor update. Now you can see I can type 150, and then when I press any of these buttons, say plus, then I can add in a new number, 150 plus 250. Now, none of the equal signs or anything else works because we haven't implemented anything in there. But you can see I've already managed to use our variable is finished typing number and toggling its state to be able to make my calculator accumulate numbers when I need it to, and to forget about the numbers when I need it to as well.